Our next speaker is going to be Don Haddock. Dan, sorry. Okay, Don's the dad, so we're going to go with Dan on this one. He is the Director of Water Utility Services with INTERA. Dan is he has 30 years of experience in planning, development, and management of water supply infrastructure and firsthand knowledge of utility management, regulation, and operations. Please welcome.
All right. Thanks for choosing to be here today. My name's Dan Haddock. I'm Principal Engineer and the Director of Water Utility Services for INTERA. And I've got 30 years of experience as a civil engineer, and I'm what you might call a PFAS generalist. I'm not a geochemist. I'm not a lawyer. But I've got about a decade of past experience working as an engineering manager for water utilities, and firsthand experience in assessing the impact of regulations and water quality issues and the related capital investments and operational challenges that utilities have to face to deal with those. And so that's the perspective I'm going to be coming from today, is really what can we help to do, what can we do practically to help our communities prepare for this, for these new regulations. And as was noted in the legislator panel this morning, fortune favors the prepared, and I think that's really I think that's a very apt saying for this. Just a note, PFAS refers to per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and PFAS, that's a family of substances. It's the entire family, including those that are currently proposed for regulation, like specific compounds like PFOA, PFOS, and others. Let's see. There we go. All right, so PFAS, or they've been dubbed forever chemicals due to their innate chemical stability. They're in the news more and more. You know, my parents and my kids are even asking me about it now. The most recent US EPA monitoring program, the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, there's the UCMR 5, is underway. And as that progresses through 2025, water utilities are collecting water quality sampling. And you can really expect it to generate a lot more attention as these communities become aware of the occurrence in PFAS in their drinking water supplies. So over the next 2 or 3 years, you can expect to see more and more of this in the news. So today, I'm going to use my time to give an overview of the challenges that PFAS is creating and some of the opportunities for beginning to address them. Mitigation for this, for PFAS, will be very expensive. In this case, an ounce of prevention is definitely worth a pound of cure. And there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty, and the regulations for PFAS are evolving rapidly. And in spite of that, there are proactive steps that can be taken to understand the risks and prevent worsening of the situation, and take advantage of current funding opportunities for mitigation. GCDs have authority to make and enforce rules, as you all well know. Primarily, those have been made for quantity purposes, but they also have the authority to make and enforce rules to prevent degradation of water quality. And PFAS finds its way into groundwater, for sure. And there may be things that GCDs can do to help communities protect their water supplies and prepare for mitigation. Now, this is a timeline that I got from the ITRC website. ITRC is the Interstate Technology Regulatory Council. It's really a fantastic source for information about PFAS. PFAS have been manufactured for 7 decades, and they're still being made. And currently, just over 1 megaton per year is produced in the world. The first awareness of health issues was in the 1970s, and that was with manufacturers of PFAS noticed effects in their employees. And over the past few decades, production of some PFAS has scaled back or stopped to be replaced by new replacement PFAS. And over that same period, there have been some advances in analytical methods with ever-decreasing levels of detection. And then remediation technology, actually technology to clean it up, treat it, is it's advancing, but it's still really in its infancy. There are many, many uses for PFAS. There's actually many more than those that are best known, which some of you may be aware of, like firefighting foam, landfills, chrome plating. These are some of the common, well-known uses. But there's a long, long list of industries that are known to use PFAS in some way. And this list is a listing of those industries and some of the uses. It includes things like paper and packaging, textiles, pesticides, building materials, refrigerants, mining, plastics, electronics, and all kinds of coatings. Typically, the materials that these industries are using are precursors to the more persistent PFAS compounds, the end products that our regulations are focused on. There's thousands of different PFAS. They're created through different manufacturing processes. They have different families and properties. The pyramid here on the left illustrates those that have gotten the attention so far, and then others that are just now being looked at. The biological effects, environmental impacts of PFAS are largely unknown, especially for the newer replacement PFAS. Some of the known health effects for some of these PFAS are listed here. It includes things like high cholesterol, liver and thyroid effects, and cancer. And as I mentioned before, the precursor compounds that are used by industry break down into these persistent chemically stable end products. And those all have different chain lengths that are denoted by the number of carbon atoms. So the table you see there lists names of some of the better known PFAS by their carbon length. And some are branched and some are linear, and they all behave very differently in the environment and in treatment. PFAS are released into the environment, into the air. They can travel long distances in the air. They're all over the globe. Travel through water and soil, discharge to water and soil through various uses. And they also end up in landfills and through consumer products and in wastewater that's discharged to surface waters. The precursors that are released to the environment break down over time into these persistent end products like PFOA and PFOS that can be detected by the drinking water sampling methods. And this breakdown, an illustration of this is that for some wastewater treatment plants, they will commonly have higher concentrations of some PFAS on the effluent leaving the plant than they have coming in. And you wonder, how can that be? How can you have more going out than coming in? And it's because some of there were precursors in the influent that were broken down by the wastewater treatment process. And so it appears that there's more coming out of the plant than entering, because those are the only compounds that are identified. That's an example of the degradation, how it breaks down. These precursor compounds in the environment can actually be reservoirs of contamination that can continue to release these end products as they degrade. So like a landfill, municipal sludge application to fields, releases to soils. Those precursors serve as reservoirs that can continue to release those end products for some time. And finally, the fate and transport of PFAS is very complex. there's all different behaviors by all the various different types of PFAS. This is a really great figure that was originally created by Arcadis. So shout out to Arcadis there. And it's seen in various places. I've seen it in a couple of training programs. It's a great illustration of the concept of PFAS dark matter. And the way to look at this is over on the left-hand side, see a release, an area of release of firefighting foam or some other compound containing PFAS. The colored areas down at the bottom represent the plume of end products that can be seen with the drinking water methods, analytical methods. And PFAS are very stable, and they can travel long distances, longer than other contaminant plumes. And shorter chain PFAS, those with fewer carbons, can actually travel farther than the longer ones. So that's the different colors you see below. Up above, the black and gray areas represents the precursors that degrade into those end products. And so those precursors can't be seen with the analytical methods that are used to look at drinking water. So that's the concept of the dark matter. There's precursors there that will end up being converted, but they can't be seen with some of the targeted analysis. This another slide related to this is the analytical methods for targeted analysis of PFAS. This is analysis that looks specifically at like PFOA, PFOS, different ones that are being regulated. These methods are somewhat limited. The UCMR5 that I mentioned previously, the sampling performed under that program includes 29 PFAS compounds. And what's on this slide here is some information from a paper that used additional targeted analysis methods to look at a total of 70 different PFAS, including the 29 covered by UCMR5. And what you see here on the charts on the right, the black bars represent the PFAS that are found by the methods that are being used for drinking water for UCMR5. And then the blue represents those found by the other methods. So this information was used to estimate the degree to which the UCMR5 sampling program may, in a sense, underreport PFAS contamination, because it's only looking for those 29. So UCMR5 is going to generate a lot of great data and a lot of interest, but the point is it's kind of a narrow window onto the total PFAS contamination. There are other non-targeted methods that quantify total concentrations of PFAS, but they're not specific. They're not looking at specific substances. So these are used for other purposes. But there are ways to look at the total volume of precursors that could eventually turn into these end compounds. And this toolbox is rapidly evolving, but there's a great need for better and broader analytical methods. So in step with the, kind of driven by the analytical methods, in step with that, the regulations are also evolving. The Texas groundwater standards are shown there on the left. The US EPA has proposed maximum contaminant levels for several PFAS and has established health advisory levels for some. And the US EPA has also proposed regulation of PFOA and PFOS under CERCLA. And they're exploring adding other PFAS to that list. CERCLA is the Superfund legislation. This will facilitate the cleanup of contamination, but water and wastewater utilities are actually concerned about the potential for cleanup costs and liability to be shifted to communities for dealing with treatment residuals. Even though they didn't create the contamination, it ends up in the wastewater that's discharged, the wastewater sludge, filter media that's used to remove it from drinking water supplies. So there's some concern there and negotiations about that on CERCLA. And US EPA is also planning to propose designation under RCRA as a hazardous constituent. Some states, I know of Michigan, has started to include PFAS, different PFAS compounds in their NPDES permit limits for wastewater. And EPA has come out with a pre-treatment program guidance for specific industries to help communities look at how to control PFAS entering their wastewater system at the source. So talking about EPA's MCLs, so the US EPA has proposed maximum contaminant levels for drinking water, MCLs, for 6 PFAS. And the 2 best known, PFOA and PFOS, are proposed at 4 parts per trillion. And just to illustrate how small that is, it's looking at Calaveras Lake here in San Antonio. The internet told me that it had a capacity of about 20 billion gallons. That would be the equivalent of a Coke can in Calaveras Lake. Would take that to over 4 parts per trillion of Coke. The other 4 are proposed to be regulated as a group using a hazard index approach. And this approach uses a ratio of concentrations of the contaminant to a health-based water concentration. And those ratios are added up, and as long as it's below 1, it's under the MCL. That applies to these 4 here, PFHXS, PFNA, PFBS, and then what are commonly known as the Gen X chemicals. The thing about this hazard index approach is it's very expandable. You know, you could add a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and within the same hazard index. On EPA's proposed regulations, the public comment period is closed, but these proposed MCLs are still in review. And the final MCLs could be very different, or they could be different, or they could be as proposed when they come out in late 2023 or early 2024. And then the compliance schedule for communities to get this out of their drinking water is to be determined. US EPA has also established health advisory levels for PFOA, PFOS, Gen X, and PFBS based on exposure studies, on medical studies. And the health advisory levels, or HALs, for PFOA and PFOS were revised down dramatically not too long ago. They were 70 parts per trillion combined, PFOA plus PFOS. And now PFOA is at 4 parts per quadrillion, which is 1,000th of the proposed MCL for PFOA. And that would be 7 drops of Coke into Calaveras Lake would take that over the health advisory limit for Coke. As mentioned before, these health effects are only now being closely studied for many PFAS, and there's a lot of discussion and controversy and disagreement about what those are, but it's evolving. So regulatory uncertainty, this kind of regulatory uncertainty we've been talking about as a challenge for public water utilities, but another is also the high anticipated cost of mitigation. There are already a lot of capital investment needs for communities, and it's a challenge to preserve the affordability of water service. And understandably, the public wants to know that their water utility is on it, that they're working to keep their water safe. And so, they need to be reassured. And another big challenge is making decisions with limited information. Communities need to continue to plan and expand to meet growth and maintain their systems, even as new information is coming in. And PFAS treatment will be costly. There are technologies for PFAS removal that are well known to utilities, like granular activated carbon, ion exchange, and reverse osmosis. But the residuals then need to be disposed of safely or the PFAS destroyed. AWWA, the American Water Works Association, contracted Black & Veatch to develop cost models for the capital investment and the operation expenses to address the proposed MCLs. And this information was used by AWWA in their comments to EPA on the proposed standards. And in the study, they found the cost to be significantly higher than those were estimated by the EPA. They also found, not surprisingly, that the household burden for those that are served by small utilities is significantly higher than those that are served than households that are served by larger utilities, estimating that as much as $300 per month for the smallest $300 per household per month for people served by the smallest utilities, which is clearly not practical. Whoops. Got my slides out of order here. There are a lot of these small and very small groundwater dependent systems in Texas. The majority of public water supplies in Texas are groundwater based, even though, and a lot of them are small, even though the majority of the population, like in larger cities, is served by surface water. So this financial strain on small utilities is definitely going to be felt here in Texas. And as I mentioned previously, the UCMR 5 is going to make a lot of data available on PFAS occurrence. All systems in the country serving 3,300 people or more, and a lot of smaller ones on top of that, are sampling right now. And over the next couple of years, this data is going to be coming in. The analytical methods have advanced a lot since the last time this was done, and so there's going to be a lot of new data. It's going to be very useful for analyzing PFAS contamination, but it's also going to find its way into the media. And customers are going to want assurances, as this becomes more and more of a public discussion. Customers are going to want assurance that their utilities are being proactive and that they're on top of the problem. There's limited data on PFAS occurrence right now, but more data is available on potential sources. And this can be useful for assessing potential risks and focusing attention where it's warranted until more data becomes available. This figure here shows the groundwater conservation districts in Texas, and it also shows the locations of currently regulated facilities in US EPA databases that are engaged in activities that are commonly associated with the use of one or more PFAS. And so this list is made up of a lot of the industries that were on the previous slide, so textiles, all kinds of different things. Again, many of these uses are things that people aren't necessarily familiar with. A lot of people know firefighting foam, landfills, specific things, but there are a lot of different industrial uses of these. There's also been recent attention to the use of PFAS in hydraulic fracturing of oil and gas wells. And this is not unique to Texas, but it's obviously very important here. Analysis in this study, analysis of self-reported industry data determined that between 2013 and 2022, a total of 43,000 pounds of PFTE, which is Teflon, and 53,000 pounds of other PFAS were injected as part of hydraulic fracturing fluids into 1,600 oil and gas wells in 73 counties in Texas. And so the concerns here, related to abandoned and orphaned wells, or the migration of PFAS and other contaminants, via improperly abandoned wells, but also the treatment and disposal of flowback water. And also potentially airborne emissions of PFAS from well flaring. Airborne deposition that's an important way that PFAS moves around the world. So, again, improperly abandoned wells are also prevent a risk of just plain old surface contamination getting down into the aquifer. And, Virginia talked about these quite a bit. This is a nice figure from the Edwards Aquifer Authority, so shout out to them. Now I'd like to talk about some proactive measures that utilities and groundwater conservation districts might take to face these challenges. The first, obviously, is to just understand the potential problem and risks. And if there are risks, then it's better to start thinking about it now instead of waiting. And not relying solely on drinking water results. As we talked about, they look at a narrow window, and they're just part of the picture. And so looking at potential sources is also an important part of taking stock of potential risks to your groundwater supplies. This will help you prioritize where to focus your attention and make the best use of your resources. And it'll also prepare you to communicate with the public as attention in this issue starts to ramp up. You'll be ready for that communication, demonstrate a proactive approach. Knowing where these risks may be, can also begin to consider steps to minimize further contamination. Examples of this might be limiting or monitoring wastewater biosolids applications on fields that are in recharge areas. Or it might be, installing monitoring wells to keep, track of what's happening around a suspected source. Or it might be, as we move into, indirect potable reuse and direct potable reuse, looking at injection of wastewater into wells, ASR wells. We want to make sure we're not putting something in there that we don't want there. In some areas, mitigation is going to require regional solutions, particularly for smaller utilities. And collecting this information now can really help position your communities to take advantage of available funding. Again, good fortune favors the prepared. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act made grant funding available specifically for emerging contaminants. And Texas' share of this alone is approximately $57 million in grant funding per year in the form of principal forgiveness through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. It can be used for a wide range of activities and mitigation approaches. So in summary, PFAS regulation will continue, it's coming and will continue to evolve. Public attention and concern will continue to increase, and small utilities with fewer resources and private well owners are really going to be challenged to address the contamination. Prevention, to the extent that it can be done, is definitely worth the effort because the cure is very expensive. And proactive steps can help groundwater conservation districts and those that they serve understand and minimize the risks and prepare to effectively compete for available funding as it comes up. And with that, thank you for your time and your attention, and I'd be glad to take any questions with the time we have left. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, go to the microphone with your questions, please.
We're talking a lot about reuse and other types of water. Currently, golf courses are being watered by effluent. I'm wondering how much of this is going to be found in that water that's sprayed out on these golf courses that walk on and children run on and dogs run on, and how much treatment might be happening or could be happening at level 1 and level 2?
I'm so sorry. I'm a little bit hearing impaired. I don't know if it's the echo or something like that, but would you mind repeating that?
Okay, so one of the reuses for water is effluent put on golf courses. Mm-hmm. My question is, how much of this stuff are we going to be finding in level 1 and level 2 treated effluent that golfers are reaching down with their hands and dogs are running and playing and children are wallowing in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that probably, I mean, again, I am a PFAS I'm not an expert on, toxicology or anything like that, but I think most exposure comes through water, food,
Okay.
that type of thing. I think that probably that contact is not that big of a deal, but you know, irrigation and recharge, places that use treated wastewater for recharge of aquifers, this is something they're having to pay attention to now because sometimes that wastewater has PFAS in it, and they have to look at that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
It's not so much of a question, but it's more of a comment. It sounds like PFAS is here. It's not going to go away. We're not going to be able to get rid of it. It's just a matter of trying to mitigate it as best as we can. So, yeah. So if it's being on the golf courses, it's in the water, it's in the food, it's pretty much everywhere. So, I think it's just a matter of concern is trying to keep up to date with the awareness and what's going to be coming out in regulations and making our constituents and our citizens aware of what's going on. So, thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of what compelled me when I met to want to make this talk is preparing for when the attention starts to build up. Like, we need to be ready to explain what's going on to people.
So I have a question for you in that regard. Have you given consideration, or is the regulation on what the testing intervals are going to be recommended to be? Is this an annual test? Is this semi-annual?
Yeah, that's all laid out in the proposed regulation, and it could change. And it's the type of thing where, the initial sampling, everybody does the initial sampling. I'm not going to get the details right, but everybody does the initial sampling. Based on what you find, you may not have to do it every year, or you may have to do it quarterly. And then, depending on whether you find it, you may be able to continue with less frequent sampling, or you may be kicked into that category where you have to
Okay, thank
do
you.
it more frequently.
Thank you for that.
All right.
Any other questions?
Oh, I'm guessing those MCLs or the risk levels are based on like chemical modeling, and I'm just wondering like what information is out there about the widespread actual public health impacts or observed public health impacts of PFAS.
There are behind every one of those MCLs, there's a, like a mind-numbing toxicology, report and lots of research. And again, I think there's some, controversy, or not controversy, but disagreement over what some of the health effects are. Europe may think differently than the United States, and there's thousands of these compounds, so the health effects are different for all of them.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
This is Steve Walden here, and I've been in the water sector, I think now 47 years, and it was a regulator for 28. I'm glad I'm out of the regulatory arena now to deal with this, but I'm dealing with it with a bunch of small communities that I do, pro bono assistance with. And I've been following this issue since 2017 because I was involved in a Department of Energy project with AWWA, where we started looking at this. And so I'm going to try to shed a little bit of light about whether you should be freaked out about this or not. Is that the overall issue is the blood levels that are measured in our human population in the U.S., for example, and that burden, that component has been slowly going like this, down and down and down and down, because more and more PFAS sources have been eliminated in our natural environment, whether it's food contact surfaces, et cetera. All that sort of thing has been going down. So that's good news, right? It's not all gloom and doom. It's going down, and that affects us. The bad news is, as the analytical techniques have gotten better, we now see under the hood things that were completely blind to us before, and we revealed that there is all the problems that was just discussed. Whether it is actually a problem is unknown and uncertain, because to your question, they've extrapolated the epidemiological and the toxicological data from actual, not just animal models, but there have been populations in the U.S. and in other places that have been exposed to plumes that they didn't know about. Now we know about them, and they can go back and look at human health effect issues and data collected on, that's how they know that there's like immune suppression for children and things like that. But those were high levels. So they're like just back extrapolating to numbers, so we don't really know. At some level are low burdens of this just background noise to our bodies, and there's other things that are more risky. So that's where the battle is taking place, is like, is 4 parts per trillion even reasonable?
Right.
Because there's higher numbers that may or may not become the actual issue of actual health effect. And there's reasons that I won't get into today about why that would not be a problem, for the same reason that you use it for, because it doesn't break down very much. And so there's reasons to think it might not be a problem at these super low levels. And there is data that support that there might be linearity to the data, that as you go down, you still get effects. So there's good news is it's not so bad, maybe at these really low levels. And the treatment issues are really moving it around with carbon. You can capture it with carbon. The real small chain carbon chains that are at the bottom list, like the Gen X groups, they're more difficult to capture with, as you know, with carbon, because they can pass through some of that. So that isn't like a one size fit all. And then the earlier carbon regeneration process has taken them to places to regenerate. We're then liberating the PFAS into the air. They weren't fully breaking down the carbon fluorine bond, so they're just moving it around and get it into where we all get it. So they've now proved that, to where they require better firing of the recycled carbon to get that actually breaking down the fluoride bond. And there is the black box answer is coming down the road would be, there's technologies coming that will break the carbon fluorine bond. It's dirty water in, clean water out, where you just get, basically the bond broken, you get a little bit of fluoride in your water that you can't even measure added to the thing. And it would break down everything else too. So anyway, that's the end of that. I just think that it's too early for us to say that the sky's falling. The sky's falling. It's so low, those numbers, that if you have to, the sampling people have to have extremely good technique. What do they bathe with that day? What clothes are they wearing? Because the gases, off-gassing, will give you 4 parts per trillion, and the water has nothing. But you think it does because the off-gassing put it in the water and your hands. So that's how low it is. So that's going to be hard to live with that.
Yeah. No, there's certainly a lot that's unknown and still being investigated by people 100 times smarter than I am. But I think the takeaway is that these regulations are coming, and good to help our communities prepare, and just to be aware of what the potential risks are as things are sorted out.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Thank
We
you.
certainly appreciate that. Sounds like you have plenty to talk about during the social hour tonight. Thank you.